Let me get to the very busy Michael Watson. Good morning, sir. I say very busy. Are you very busy?
Very busy, and great to see you.
Are we ready for the primary election? Not that you have too much to do with the primary.
We are, Paul, and I think that's the important part about the teamwork that it takes to get elections done here in Mississippi. And spending time with all 82 of our circuit clerks and our elections commissioners across the state has been really important for us to have that really open lines of communication to make sure everybody's doing their job.
I want to get to the Tidewater thing. We got plenty of time, though. Let me just spend a couple of moments picking your brain here because you've been in the fray for a while. Is it time on a national basis, certainly on a state basis, to do something as far as I just think we as the voting public have lost some of our bearings on whether these ads are coming from PAC, whether they're coming from the candidate themselves, and we're just kind of confused on this. When we even some of the folks that are communicating with us on C-Spire text line, they're not sure where these ads come from. But when you have an ad that's so I don't care who it's for, Republican or Democrat, when it's so explicitly incorrect or vile, people ought to know who's coming from. And I know that we say the candidate is not associated with this, but it's a wink, wink, nod, nod, and we understand that.
So,
Your
yeah,
thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think it all starts with, I mentioned it on Thursday, the enforcement piece of campaign finance. If these individuals know that, hey, nobody in Mississippi is going to enforce the law, what does it matter? We can go in and do whatever we want. And we had two big PACs yesterday that we were looking at that did not file the reports yet. One, Invest in Mississippi PAC, and two, Conservative Values PAC, as well as others. And so, there are several out there. But the important piece is when they think that campaign finance law is not being enforced in Mississippi, why bother with following the law?
Yeah. Are they able to continue operating if they didn't meet the deadline?
So they have a 48-hour window to file, and they will be on a 48-hour list. That we have to
what are the consequences?
So there are fines that we can assess, but that, as you know, this now goes to ethics, and then from ethics to the AG's office, which is again why I mentioned at the Neshoba County Fair, perhaps it's time to bring this all under one roof. And again, I don't want more power or authority, but if nobody's going to enforce the law, we'll stand in the gap for Mississippians.
Well, every year, every election, it seems like they get worse and worse on these things, and I just think the voting public's lost control. They've lost faith on it because some of the last ones that have just hit prior to the primary are just way beyond the pale.
Yeah, it certainly shows a lack of character, no doubt.
Well, I got to believe even when you are for that candidate, be it Republican or Democrat, and you hear this and you're smart enough, certainly in this audience, to know that is just wrong, factually wrong, I think it's going to hurt the candidate more than help them. We'll see.
Probably so, but it begs the question, should the candidate then come out and say, hey, I'm not necessarily in agreement with that. I don't coordinate with them. I get it. But even that, though, Paul, the coordination piece is at the federal level, not the state.
Well, when the candidate comes out and says the opposite, that he is he backs that up, it's even worse. So, but that's another story. What do we expect? What are we looking at as far as the turnout? What do you think?
So we're still trailing 19's numbers on absentee voting. We obviously have a few days left, and if you're not going to be able to make it on Election Day, please make sure you make your plans. You can still go vote at your circuit clerk's office from 8 to 5 until Friday, and then Saturday they will be open from 8 to noon. So if you're needing to vote absentee, please make plans to go do that. And then again, Election Day clearly is Tuesday, and the polls will be open from 7 to 7. So hopefully folks will get out there and take advantage of the opportunity to have their voices heard.
And it's not going to be any cooler. So as you go and if you're subjected to the heat one way or the other, then in a negative way, go early.
Yeah, go
because
7 o'clock.
It's going to be hot. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Is it around 25,000? I heard that number. I'm sure it's more than that now.
It's higher than that now. So
what are we talking about? Any idea?
Latest numbers on absentee. I can't remember, Paul, but I'll have that for you before we get off of here.
Okay.
26,000 had been requested as of July 31st. I had that on my notes, sorry.
There you go. All right, let's talk about this Tidewater thing. Lance sent me something from, what was this? of Time, Tidewater, and Public Trust, M. Casey German, the introduction. Lance, I don't know where you found that
Mississippi
one.
Law Journal.
Is that where it
Used
was?
to have those laying around the house in my dad, so I remember those babies.
I had some that I collected for a while, and I finally threw them out. But over the past several years, increased demands for coastal resources have created disputes over the respective rights of private landowners and the public in the bios and tidal streams and beaches of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. These legal rights are determined by the public trust doctrine, a concept that has evolved in America's jurisprudence through Roman and English law. Its philosophic underpinnings is that of seas and shores and the resources found within. And it goes on and on and on. But when you read this, and I read about 4 or 5 pages deep, it gets tremendously complicated. It sounds like everybody's trying to do the right thing, and Tidewaters are one of those things where it's here and then it's not here. Who owns it? Who can use it? When can you use it? Et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think over all the years that it's gotten any less complicated.
It hasn't, and I want to, Paul, if you don't mind, it gets to be pretty deep, so I'm going to try to wade into it. So if you would float along with me into Tidelands.
Well, I might be there with you for a while, and then you may leave me on dry land the next moment. So,
which would be Fastlands, which is also
if you're going to continue these analogies and metaphors, then we'll play games on that one. But
Fair enough.
Just try to make it as simple as possible. That's all I can say.
So this is an issue that's been around since 6th century Roman Code of Justinian. And if you had that on your bingo card this morning, that's a big win. So it's been around a long time. And basically, Tidelands, for those who don't understand the concept here, the state owns the tidelands, the bottomlands, and filled tidelands, which are known as fastlands. And so basically the legislature said the Secretary of State will oversee that. So pretty much I'm the landlord of tidelands. So if there's rent that needs to be paid, then I'm the one that receives that. I'm the one that decides if leases can be signed or not. Mm-hmm. So that is some case law. The Columbia case, by the way, back when Eric Clark was the Secretary of State, the Columbia Land Development case was one of the ones that said the Secretary of State has the ability to decide whether or not you can lease tidelands. So this goes back, as you mentioned, it isn't just something that happened yesterday. This is something that's been going on for several years. The previous administration clearly had some issues with the city of Biloxi, as you had the mayor on last week, I believe it was, and he talked about the issues that Biloxi has. And I want to remind folks that I'm from the coast. I grew up in Pascagoula. I fished these waters. I've been on the boat. I understand Tidelands and the important line between economic development and then making sure we're preserving this. And so it's an important piece for me as well, being from there. So it's not just this mean old Secretary of State up in Jackson is trying to be mean to the coast. I'm from the coast, and that's the important piece. Folks in Belmont own the Tidelands just as much as people from Biloxi. And so this is a state-owned asset that we've got to make sure that we're getting just value for. And I think that's where the rub comes.
So where was he wrong in what he said as far as setting precedent in the past?
So there's the big 3 cases that are big 2 really that they talk about of late. The Long Beach case, that one was one where if you follow the timeline, that was decided basically on the court said, look, there were several agreements that had been signed between Long Beach and the Secretary of State's office, between Long Beach and Long Beach Harbor Resort. And in this timeline, at one point in time, one of the agreements that we signed basically ratified the lease that they had signed with Long Beach Harbor Resort. That was a time specific. That was a fact specific. That was not Tidelands in general. And basically what the court said was, had you not ratified that lease between the city and Long Beach Harbor Resort, you would be well within your rights to demand a Tidelands lease. So we thought at that point in time that the Supreme Court had it pretty clear. Then comes RW Development. RW Development is the case that he told you about, the pier, the public pier. I want to be very clear here. We have offered them a lease for the public pier. And, they talk about it was handicap accessible and it's going to be really nice. Mm-hmm. That's fine. We're for that. That's access to the Tidelands. That's one of the reasons that we signed leases. It was a rent-exempt lease. They didn't pay a dime for it. But the idea is, Paul, that is state property. Every citizen across the state of Mississippi owns that, which is why it comes through the Secretary of State's office, and we were going to offer the lease. Rent-exempt. So they didn't have to pay for it.
But in other words, they were still under the domain of whatever at any moment they paid for the pier, which was, I'm sure, quite an expensive venture. The state could come in and claim it as their own at any given time.
Well, under the lease, if the lease did...
if they broke the lease. And then after that, was it a 99-year lease or something like that?
So they can be a 40-year lease with a 25-year extension and then an agment to re-up the lease at the end of that.
Also, when we come back, I'm just going to ask, was this exacerbated during the initial allowance of casinos back after Camille when we did it? And also the after Katrina. We'll talk about that when we come back with Michael Watson. Secretary of State Michael Watson here. Next Tuesday is the primary day. Hopefully the turnout will be respectable, because if it's like anything like the last one, who knows exactly what happens, what will happen.
Yeah,
I'm going to go back on the Tidelands and ask you this. So from what we're hearing from you versus what we heard from the mayor, is the Secretary of State is the authority, regardless if those Tidelands are in a municipality or in a county. It doesn't matter.
That's correct. And what he talked about, and I'm going to be very clear here, the Small Craft Harbor Act, there's a key word in there that says the municipalities have to acquire that. And the definition of acquire, there's a few things that are listed in there. One of them is the word reclamation, and that's what the Supreme Court used. I think they expanded the definition of reclamation in their findings in RW Development. They also then said, because we hadn't been asking for leases from that specific, and let's remind the listeners here, Paul, that specific location, this doesn't apply to across the board, that because we had not asked for leases from them, then we were stopped from doing so. Then 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court took the completely opposite position on estoppel in a case out of Bolivar County. So I think there's still some confusion out there. The court hasn't answered the questions that we need answered. So that basically puts us in the position of, you either got to legislate, so we need a legislature to clean this up, you got to negotiate, or you got to litigate. And that's what we've been forced to do.
Now, Michael, this is also, it has pertinence in outside the coast, does it not? How about on the Mississippi River?
It does not. So basically, Tidelands go to the lower three coastal counties.
That's it.
Yes, sir.
As far as Tidelands is concerned. Okay, so none of these rules and regulations apply inland.
Correct. We're all of the lower three counties.
I do want to ask you this, though. When you said acquire, does that mean legally purchase? Is that what I mean? You said reclamation. I don't understand how those two are connected, but you said they have to acquire it.
Yeah,
and acquire it from whom?
There's a list in the statute, basically the owner of the land, which is the state. So they can lease it, they can buy it, they can reclaim it, as they did here. There's a lease in the statute. I think it's 59-15-1, if I've got that off the top of my head. So it's pretty clear to us, and I think that, again, the court's got some more questions to answer.
Did previous Secretary of States abrogate this in any way to kind of massage it a little bit to get the casinos in there, or did they stick back by it then?
They didn't, and that's an important question that you asked there, again, because the Columbia land case I mentioned earlier, Secretary Clark basically refused to offer a lease to a casino that was coming to Henderson Point area. So that gave, the court said, look, he's got that discretion as a Secretary of State. So this has been going on for a while. As you mentioned, going into the break, when Katrina hit, the legislature came in and said, all right, look, you can come on 800-foot onshore, basically, and you're going to have an assessment as opposed to a Tidelands lease. So the casinos that could get a lease could then decide, you know what, we're going to move onshore and then pay this assessment, or we can continue paying the Tidelands lease.
Do we know how much money we make from these tide leases?
We do. It's roughly $10 million a year.
And that goes to the state treasurer?
So that goes to the two funds, the Tidelands Fund, the Assessment Fund, that then goes to the legislature. The legislature decides how it's going to be appropriated. DMR gets a block of that money to meet federal match dollars to bring into the state. So it's really important money for the coast. And again, this is access for all Mississippians. This isn't just for the coast, and I think that's the rub there. The good old boys in Biloxi thought, hey, we got this coast Secretary of State now. We're going to get to do whatever we want to do. That's not the case. I'm still going to follow the law for the citizens of Mississippi.
So the matter is settled, or is it still to be worked on?
Still to be worked on. We've got some issues out there. And again, it goes back to negotiate, legislate, or litigate. And I think the question becomes, we've asked the Attorney General, hey, we've got some questions out there that we need you to help us, litigate, negotiate, or legislate. So her response, and I heard her on the radio the other day, she said something about that she agrees or we disagree on the Supreme Court ruling. That's not the case. That was news to us that she said we disagree. Her office has been working with us on that case specifically. Doug Miracle has been fantastic to work with. I think she was referring to a DMR issue where DMR basically issues permits for folks to work on this land. And our claim was, look, if the individual doesn't have lease of this property, then why are you giving them permits to go work on it if they don't control it? She disagreed and said basically that's not their job. They don't have to determine who has ownership, which, again, I disagree with. But that is what it is. We did not disagree on the Supreme Court case. We said, look, we're going to follow it as well. The question becomes, what else is out there?
Is a resolution holding up anything else that we don't know of, another casino or anything like that?
So there are a couple of casino projects that are out there, one of which in Biloxi, it's called Biloxi Capital. It's one that, and this is pretty funny, Paul, we were negotiating on a lease, and basically I started negotiating against myself. So they wouldn't come back to the table. So we said, look, we'll make it even better for you. And again, I think that's the piece that people don't want to talk about in Biloxi. I've done everything I can to work within the bounds of the law to make sure that we're continuing along the line of Tidelands, economic development, and preservation. So we've done the best that we can. And Biloxi doesn't really want to negotiate. They want their way or the highway. And that's where the rub comes.
Any of this land put aside for park area or wildlife or anything like that?
There's coastal wetland preserves. There are some things with Tidelands that go in again to access when we're talking about boardwalks or boat ramps for folks to get to the water to be able to enjoy it. So yes, sir, that's definitely a part of it.
And just one other question I'm inquisitive about. Do you also have the right to the minerals underneath that?
So that's
on the minerals.
Good question, and I failed to cover that earlier on our overview there. So basically, we have Tidelands out to the federal where federal water starts. It's roughly 3 miles south of our barrier islands. Within that, MDA has the ability to lease the minerals, oil and gas, and then we have the ability to lease anything else. So
any gold out there? Do you have any idea if there's any gold in the ocean?
I've been spearfishing a few times, but I didn't take a shovel with me to dig around.
You ever watch Bering Sea? I mean, these guys pull up some gold. They have ships out there constantly trolling for gold out there, and it does a pretty good job. I didn't realize it. I'm not sure if it's any off in the oceans at the Gulf Coast.
It may be out there. Me, you, Lance, Perez, we can all go down there and do a little digging.
I think I don't think it'd be worth the effort, to be honest with you. But that's one way or the other. How's the fishing out there?
Fishing. I hadn't been out much lately, Paul. I've been too busy.
All right. One note on the put on your legal hat here for a second. The third federal indictment of former President Donald Trump by Special Counsel Jack Smith. It was unsealed and announced late yesterday, charging Trump with 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceedings, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an unofficial proceedings, and conspiracy against rights. Basically, and somebody noted this on my Twitter account, basically said what we have is the president being convicted from freedom of speech, but for lying as a politician. and I thought, there's some merit in there one way or the other, considering who is charging him and who's lying. But former President Trump was the only person charged in the indictment, although 6 co-conspirators were mentioned without being named. Trump will appear before a judge, and that happens tomorrow, Thursday, and we will see what happens with that one. Your thoughts?
Tuesday's going to be a big election day. We got to make sure everybody's out from 7 to 7. If you haven't absentee voted yet and you need to, courthouse is open from 8 to 5 to Friday, and then 8 to noon on Saturday.
Yeah.
So make sure you get out there and go and vote.
Spoken like a smooth politician. Thank you, man. Appreciate it very much.
You got it, Paul. Thank you.
You have completely uncleared the situation for us as far as the Tidelands. But the good news is, if you're a landlubber, you don't have to worry too much about that. So, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
But they do own it.
Absolutely. Just keep the $10 million coming in. That's all we care about in inland.